Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations. In October 2019, on the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, Francis participated in an event that involved the desecration of the Vatican gardens, the desecration of St. Peter's Basilica, and the enthronement of a demon in the form of an ancient idol adored by professed adversaries of our blessed Lord. The Pachamama event is well known, and I've done numerous exposés on the various times Pachamama has resurfaced since that initial event. However, one detail escaped my notice until 2 months ago, when another Catholic YouTuber and I were talking privately about the alleged Fatima consecration Francis was doing on the Feast of the Annunciation, when a new and interesting set of details was brought to my attention, and it really cast the Pachamama debacle in a whole new sinister light. So I want to thank that YouTuber for assisting me. There's a link to his channel in the comments section, in the pinned comment here on YouTube. So go check his channel out. I think you'll like it. And today we're going to go over all of the Pachamama events in brief, and I'll demonstrate how they are all an attack on the sanctity of the Blessed Virgin Mary herself. So let's get into the story. And let's begin before the Pachamama event itself. In 2018, Francis took a famous South American trip that I was at the time not bothering to cover. My channel was started in 2018 and I was very new at it. I hadn't learned yet that pretty much everything he does is used to cause division and scandal in the church. On that trip, he displayed his first act of wickedness involving ancient demonic idols. In January 2018, Francis visited Chile. He met with secular leaders, said several masses, and, well, at one mass he wore a chasuble that featured this idol. For those listening on Spotify or Podbean, it's the same symbol as the Nazca line walkers used in ancient times in South America. The symbol is called the Atacama giant. The image was unveiled on the Feast of the Holy Family according to the pre-conciliar liturgical calendar, that is the 1962 liturgical calendar, and it happened here on January 8th of that year. That feast celebrates Our Lady, St. Joseph, and our Blessed Lord. Bear that in mind as we move forward, because there will be a noticeable pattern here. Now, Francis wore that getup at the various masses he offered in Chile on his trip and said some fairly blasé, Francis, almost Catholic-sounding things during that while wearing that icon on his chest. And for those not aware, the Atacama giant is a representation of an ancient demon, cut from the same cloth or perhaps the same entity as the Paca demon. Just a different culture, a different representation, the same modes of worship, same entity. There are no coincidences in any of these things, folks. The Pachamama event itself came about 18 months later, in the next year, a mere month before the initial whispers of the woe and affliction that dominated everything from 2020 onwards began. For the brief account of that story to refresh your memory, here is an excerpt from a new, unfortunately deleted article on the website Contra Recentia Sacrilegia, where the unknown author posted the following description of the whole mess. And unfortunately, it's been deleted, but I saw it quoted somewhere, and you can, in my sources, you'll be able to find the quoting citation of it. Anyway, quote, "On October 4th, Pope Francis attended an act of idolatrous worship of the pagan goddess Pachamama. He allowed this worship to take place in the Vatican gardens, thus desecrating the vicinity of the graves of the martyrs and of the Church of the Apostle Peter. He participated in this act of idolatrous worship by blessing a wooden image of Pachamama. On October 7th, the idol of Pachamama was placed in front of the main altar at St. Peter's and then carried in procession to the Synod Hall. Pope Francis said prayers in a ceremony involving this image and then joined in this procession. When wooden images of this deity were removed from the Church of Santa Maria in Transpontina, where they had been sacrilegiously placed, and thrown into the Tiber by Catholics outraged by this profanation of the Church, Pope Francis, on October 25th, apologized for the removal, and another wooden image of Pachamama was returned to the Church. Thus, a new profanation was initiated. On October 27th, in the closing Mass for the Synod, he accepted a bowl used in the idolatrous worship of Pachamama and placed it on the altar." End quote. The initial act was on the Feast of St. Francis of Assisi, a saint who had been rebranded by some of the worst public figures in the world as the patrons of all things green, which Makes little sense given that his message was penance and restoration of a pious Catholic faith in a time of ecclesial corruption. Now let's go back, though, to October 7th. The idol of Pachamama was placed in front of the main altar in St. Peter's on that day, which is the feast of Our Lady of the Rosary according to the traditional liturgical calendar, the 1962 liturgical calendar. That's a second feast day corrupted by Francis. The idols had been removed by Alexander Schugel from a parish dedicated to Our Lady as well. The day Francis accepted the bowl of soil which had been used for that wicked rite was October 27th, the feast of the dedication of the Basilica of Our Lady, Help of Christians. A minor Marian feast day unless you're in Turin, Italy, or in a community elsewhere in the world tied to Turin, Italy. And Turin is not that far from the Vatican, all things considered. The next act by Francis was the issuing of a Pachamama commemorative coin, which I reported on in 2020 when it came out. From the CNA article reporting this, quote, "The 10 euro silver coin marks the 50th anniversary of World Earth Day. The front of the coin is the image of a pregnant woman embracing her round belly, which looks like a globe. Stalks of wheat are in her hair. Luigi Oldiani, an Italian sculptor and Catholic who designed the coin, told CNA that he wanted to imagine the Earth as a young pregnant woman who protects the Earth, a young mother. The image on the coin has been compared to carved wooden figures of a pregnant woman that were on display in churches and at events during the Vatican's 2019 Synod of Bishops on the Amazon. Those figures, referred to by Pope Francis and others as Pachamama, were said by some to depict an Andean fertility goddess, while Vatican spokesmen characterized them more vaguely as symbols of quote-unquote life. 2 such Pachamama figures were eventually taken from a church near the Vatican and thrown into the Tiber River and were later recovered. Oldiani, the artist, said he was commissioned by the Mint to design a coin expressing the theme of Earth Day, and the idea of the woman bearing the earth was his own approach to that theme. The image of the young woman is just something that came to me, Oldiani told CNA. End quote. Yeah, it just came to him. Maybe it was honest inspiration, these things do happen, or maybe it was something preternatural. Either way, this coin is clearly Pachamama, regardless of the hemming and hawing about it that the Vatican engaged in after the fact. Here are some basic facts about the Pachamama coin. It was announced by the Vatican on October 13th, the anniversary of the miracle of the sun at Fatima, but the story gets weirder from here. On the day of the miracle of the sun, when the event was happening in 1917, St. Maximilian Kolbe was in Rome, watching a procession of stonecutters promising to take the church over and to end the faith. He was watching the procession at that time that the miracle of the sun was occurring in Portugal. October 16th, 3 days later, the day the coin was formally issued by the Vatican, is the anniversary of St. Maximilian Kolbe founding the Militia Immaculata, which was his prayerful organization whose peaceful purpose was to combat the errors of the stonecutters in defense of the church. The Marian connection to the Pachamama event is more than a pattern at this point. And if you're not convinced that this is a big deal, that Pachamama is just a representation of Our Lady done in some context that you and I aren't quite familiar with, I present to you this excerpt from the blog of Joshua T. Charles, who did the legwork on finding out what the scholarly work says about Pachamama. He begins by talking about his confrontation with an unnamed bishop on Twitter, and how that bishop defended the Pacha-demon's inclusion in the Vatican at that time. Quote, "So why do I write this blog post today? Because of a recent, again disturbing encounter with a Catholic bishop over Twitter. I won't mention his name, but in our interaction he claimed that Pachamama was just a, quote, cultural symbol. Addressing him with the respect due to him as Your Excellency, I protested that a statement simply wasn't true. I suggested he check out standard encyclopedic reference sources to see that this was so. I included a link to the Encyclopedia Britannica entry on Pachamama, which simply says Andean deity. When I informed the bishop about this, he merely said, Happy Holy Week. That's it. In the same encyclopedia's entry on nature worship, Pachamama is described as the Andean Earth Mother figure worshipped by the Peruvians. In the entry on Bolivia, we find this line, quote, "Some characteristics of pantheistic pre-Columbian religion have survived in the Indian communities of the Altiplano, especially in the worship of Pachamama, the goddess of the earth." Emphasis added. In an entry on Inca religion, we read that the earth was called Pachamama, or Earth Mother. Encyclopedia.com contains these words in its entry on Pachamama. Pachamama, the Earth Mother, goddess of the Incas. Pachamama was an agricultural deity worshipped with regard to fertility and the protection of crops. In short, it is quite clear that Pachamama is no mere cultural symbol. She is an earth goddess, an idol. The quote, Mother Earth worshipped by pre-Christian groups. As a psalmist reminds us, quote, "For all the gods of the peoples are idols," end quote. And that's not the end of it. Mr. Charles had at one time been a Protestant missionary and well connected to other Protestant missionaries before he became a Catholic. He reached out to some old friends, explained what was happening, and they provided him with this information. There's more than merely honoring ancient practices going on here. There's something being done by design. Remember what I told you about St. Maximilian Kolbe here a moment ago. Quote, "Throughout this debacle, I kept having a vague memory about having heard about this Pachamama before. Then I remembered that when I was in my early 20s, still a Protestant, I had a dear friend who had been on multiple missionary trips to South America. On most of those trips, he frequently encountered syncretistic Catholic ancient sites and practices, some even having to do with Pachamama. The stories he relayed to me were disturbing. I recently asked this Protestant friend to write a testimony about some of his encounters with Pachamama on his missionary trips, given recent events, and particularly the claims by some Catholic bishops that Pachamama is a mere, quote, cultural symbol. Not only does his account refute the notion, but it testifies to a very disturbing acquiescence in this ancient group by at least some of the Catholic Church in South America. Additionally, this friend spoke of multiple stonecutter symbols placed around these altar areas, as well as on top of Catholic churches. Locals, he said, would tell them and point out the many places where there's a good deal of ancient religion down here that is mixed with Catholicism and stonecutter symbolism." End quote. In the past, I also presented a video on how the Paca demon was used as a sort of mascot or symbolic representation for a project by the United Nations for what appear on the surface to be pretty innocuous purposes, having to do with development and all green things. But cast in the light of that man's testimony, combined with Francis's odd focus on that part of the world and his insistence on developing a new rite of mass for that region of the world that does include ancient practices, you get a picture painted that is anything but innocuous. There is a pattern here of smearing the Blessed Virgin and those who observe her with this idol. There is a pattern of stonecutters being involved, whether in South America or in their institutions that Francis allies with. And this is why so many Catholics did not trust his consecration, given that it happened on a major Marian feast day. Now I have to ask, did I miss any major involvement or action involving the Pacademon? Did I miss any events or dates? Things that happened? Did I leave any of them out? If I did, let me know in the comments, please. And along with your thoughts on this whole debacle, I'm definitely interested in what you have to say on this. Have we seen the last of Pachamama? Is Francis likely to allow something like it to happen yet again? Were those Marian dates that I listed there merely a coincidence? Let me know in the comments, please, and like and subscribe if you haven't. It really does help. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.